It's Wednesday morning. I'm Bob Joseph. You're listening to News Radio 1290, WNBF and WNBF.com. Johnson City Police Chief Brent Dodge joins us now to talk about what happened at the Wal-Mart store in the Village yesterday afternoon. Good morning, Chief Dodge.
Good morning, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
A remarkable sequence of events, and given what transpired yesterday, it seems to me that this was probably the best outcome that one could have hoped for, given what developed around 2:30 yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, we were very pleased that we were able to take him into custody without causing any further harm to him and stopping him from completing the act of killing himself. It really was a kind of a best-case scenario.
How did this all start? When did the people in Wal-Mart begin to sense that there was an issue with this 40-year-old man?
Well, several of the employees noticed him, kind of walking around aimlessly, and we're kind of keeping an eye on him because they recognized that he wasn't acting quite normally. But then at some point, he produced the razor knife and brought himself to their attention directly. And began to cut himself. And, at that point, people began to run away from him. Wal-Mart did a great job activating their fire alarm system, and, the employees ushered everyone out of the store to isolate him from being able to harm anyone should he change his mind and direct his actions towards other people. And they called us, and, we were able to come in and, locate him and try to start negotiating a peaceful surrender, which was not effective.
Did the man, to your knowledge, make any threats against others or toward, say, customers or employees during the time that he was in the store before the police were called?
No, he did not.
As far as the situation when the first officer arrived, I'm guessing that perhaps the store might have still been in the process of being evacuated?
Yeah, that is correct. From what the video footage that I've seen, the store was largely empty at that point. They were able to open fire doors, and as soon as people heard the alarms, they started exiting in an orderly fashion. So the officer arrived while that was taking place.
So where was the man when the first Johnson City police officer entered the store?
He was towards the front left part of the store near the produce.
All right. And was the officer, at least in the initial moments, able to get very close to him? How did, given the situation, and unfortunately we sadly know that in fluid situations violence can take a terrible turn, without any warning, did the officer keep his distance, or how did he approach?
Yeah, he was able to keep his distance. He didn't want to put too much pressure on the subject and make the subject feel compelled to do further damage to himself. Obviously, the officer wants to protect himself as well. The subject stayed in motion constantly, so that made it more difficult for the officer. And at times, he would approach the officer, challenging the officer to shoot him. But the officer, did exactly what he was supposed to do. He kept his proper distance. He put, things in between. He kept store displays, for example, in between himself and the subject, so that the subject couldn't rapidly close the distance on him, and try to negotiate with the subject to drop the knife. But when the subject began to cut himself more, he saw that wasn't effective. This officer was not armed with a taser, so he resorted to the only less lethal tool he had, which was pepper spray, in hopes that would get the subject to drop the knife. But that didn't work. The subject then began to more rapidly move away from the officer. At that point, his backup arrived, who did have a taser, and they followed it and got within probably 10 feet of the subject, which is a really effective range for the taser. And the taser deployment was successful. It worked textbook and incapacitated the subject, and they were able to move right in, secure him in handcuffs, get the knife away from him, and at that point, then they put their personal protective equipment on and rendered first aid to him and kept pressure on his wounds to keep him from losing any more blood than was necessary.
Why was the pepper spray ineffective?
Well, you'll find oftentimes with people who are mentally disturbed that the pepper spray is not very effective. And I in a way, it was effective in keeping the subject from advancing closer towards the officer. But it's not going to make somebody, necessarily immediately drop a weapon. It's going to impede their vision, and there's going to be a pain stimulus from the burning there, but it wouldn't necessarily prevent somebody from causing further damage to themselves if they were really motivated to do so.
So ultimately, were there only 2 officers involved during this encounter, or did additional law enforcement personnel wind up inside the store?
Yeah, additional personnel ended up inside the store, and actually a third officer came in right behind the backup officer, and of course the shift lieutenant got there as soon as possible to help supervise. And by that time, they had the subject in custody. And then, myself responded along with our captain and detectives to make sure that everything was done right and everything was taken care of. And there was quite a bit of follow-up on this that detectives did. We weren't able to get any information out of the subject as far as, what his motive was, because, we have to think in larger terms here and think kind of outside the box and think, what caused him to be so distraught. And sometimes people in these situations have hurt somebody else, and then they're coming to make a statement and harm themselves. So did he kill somebody else at home and then came here to do this? So we had to try and track down his residence and track down the people close to him and make sure they were all okay and that there wasn't a larger crime here being behind the scenes that we're not aware of.
So he lives in Johnson City in an apartment?
That was the last known address we had for him initially, but upon further research, we were able to determine that he recently had moved into an apartment in Binghamton.
So were both his previous address and his current apartment in Binghamton searched to make sure everything was okay at those locations?
Yes, and the people that the people that are in his immediate life are all deemed to be safe, and this just appears to be a cry for help from somebody who reached the end of their rope. Did
anybody who was interviewed by the police investigators suggest that they knew he was in trouble and that something like this could happen? Do you know if he made any statements or threats that something like this could occur?
No, there were no direct threats. Some of the people that detectives interviewed did indicate that they had observed some erratic behavior from him in recent days, where he was making statements that weren't rational, but nothing that indicated he was intending to harm himself.
Were you or the other officers familiar with this man prior to yesterday?
No, nobody here had any dealings with him prior, and there really wasn't a lot of activity from him in the system.
Speaking with the Johnson City Police Chief Brent Dodge, following up on the incident that happened yesterday afternoon at the Wal-Mart store on Gannett Drive. In searching the locations, his previous residence in Johnson City and his apartment now in Binghamton, were other weapons or drugs found?
No, nothing of that nature.
And no notes?
No, he didn't. No notes that we were able to locate, and no, like I said, no statements to the people that he had regular contact with that he was intending to do this.
Is there any reason to believe he was under the influence of alcohol or drugs yesterday?
Well, we can't rule that out, but he wasn't speaking with us, so there was no overt indication that was the case. But at this point, we really don't know.
He was taken to Wilson Medical Center, a short distance away, for treatment?
Correct. Yeah, in cases like that, oftentimes when we make mental health arrests, they get taken to Binghamton General, where they're best equipped to handle, psychological issues. However, in these cases where there's serious medical trauma, we go right to the closest place to get them treatment, and if they need to be transferred for mental health evaluation after the physical side gets taken care of, the hospital makes that determination.
Do you think it was likely this man could have died without the intervention, without the assistance provided by the police officers immediately after he was subdued?
I think it's distinctly possible. I mean, the wounds that he had given himself, to the point where, we were able to incapacitate him, I don't think were life-threatening, although being on scene myself, I can tell you that there was quite a large amount of blood on the ground. So I was surprised to learn that he had not hit an artery. But I think if we were not able to incapacitate him when we did, he may have continued cutting himself and, eventually got there. And then if that being the case, he would have bled out and died very quickly.
One thing you didn't mention in our conversation, but I know the police department indicated in the initial statement that was released shortly after this happened that at one point he was basically almost begging the police officers to shoot him.
Yes. He was confronting the officer. He was actually approaching towards the officer, refusing to drop the knife and challenging the officer to shoot him. Anytime you have somebody with a weapon and they're advancing towards you and they're not obeying your commands, it's a very tenuous situation where, the officer has to make some split-second decisions. You can't let that person, get within arm's length of you with that weapon, and guarantee your own safety. So it can be a very tense and tough situation, but the officer did a great job by keeping his distance, by keeping displays between himself and the subject, so that he could prevent, something like that happening. And, it all ended up good.
Based on the circumstances as you know them, if one or two officers had actually opened fire after this sequence of events, including him basically saying, "Shoot me," would that likely have been a justifiable police shooting?
In my eyes, it certainly would be. When you have somebody armed with a dangerous instrument like that and not obeying your commands and advancing towards you in an aggressive way, they're not leaving you with a whole lot of options. So, it certainly, for me, is very hard to second-guess somebody who decides to shoot in that situation, given the grave danger they're potentially facing.
These are tough situations. I know since you've been chief, there have been probably at least a couple, probably more instances that have not been publicized where officers have had to make a really difficult decision of shoot, don't shoot in cases where the situation was changing very quickly. You have to make a split-second decision, and certainly from information I've had, in some of those cases, a shooting by an officer would have been justified, and it didn't happen.
Right, yeah. There are other instances that come immediately to mind where other officers have been in very similar circumstances. And oftentimes the guys have shown great restraint. They keep a calm head, which is very important, and have employed less lethal things. In both the cases that I'm thinking of, they were able to deploy tasers successfully, which incapacitated the people and prevented lethal force from being used, thankfully.
Are the officers who were involved in the Wal-Mart response, are they working today?
I know at least one of them is working, for sure, yes.
All right. They didn't request, or you didn't, in a situation like this, you didn't mandate a day off, given, it had to be such an emotional situation. It's scary just talking about it from afar, hours after it's been concluded, but they didn't seek a day off after this.
No, these guys are resilient, and they see a lot of things, and they're dedicated. I did make sure to talk to the officers specifically, and see how they're doing and see how they're handling it. And it definitely causes a lot of stress. But as long as they take some time to decompress, it wasn't a traumatic enough event for them to prevent them from coming back to work.
After most major incidents, there's a review, sort of a debriefing with all those involved. Is that going to happen in this case?
Yes. We'll, we've been reviewing video footage and discussing amongst ourselves, different tactics and what could have been done. But, there's so far in our review of what happened, really couldn't have asked anybody involved to have done anything better than they did. All sides, both Wal-Mart and the officers, really did an outstanding job, and in my opinion, led to the best possible outcome given the circumstances.
And following every incident, there's something to be learned. Every incident, I'm sure, provides specific additional insights into how things can be done better, things that were done well, and also just insights for future incidents, how police and others can best respond.
Sure. Yeah, we're constantly trying to self-evaluate and self-improve, and any small lessons that we can take away that could make things a little better. Maybe we can acquire some more equipment so that everybody has a taser all the time.
How many tasers are currently routinely deployed with your officers who are out on the street?
Well, almost everybody here is certified to carry a taser. We have 6 tasers available, which under normal circumstances is enough for every individual officer to have one. But like with any piece of technology, sometimes they go down, sometimes they need maintenance and have to be shipped out. That's not something that we can work on in-house or even locally. They have to be sent back to Taser in Arizona to get worked on. So at the moment, we're down a couple. And, we don't mandate that an officer has to take one out every shift, but so some people choose not to. As it is, they have a tremendous amount of equipment they have to wear now, especially some of the thinner, fitter guys have trouble. There's literally not enough room on their duty belts for everything.
It is remarkable what the police officer in 2016 is routinely wearing. It's so different than what it was just 10 or 15 years ago. Yeah,
it absolutely is. And, in addition to what they have to wear, we've now gone to a system of every patrol zone has a patrol bag that's kept in the station, and because there was so much equipment that officers were having to take in and out and make several trips to do so at the start and end of their shift, that it was really becoming a burden. Because when you think about it, we've got to take defibrillators, and they can't be left in the cars. You've got Narcan, crime scene equipment, cameras and stuff, tasers, possibly long guns. It's a fairly long list of stuff that we don't leave in cars that would have to come in and out. So we've actually got big duffel bags that they can now keep everything, all the equipment for each zone in, and they just have to bring one large bag in and out with them to kind of simplify things a little bit.
One final question. The man who was involved in yesterday's incident, is he still at Wilson Medical Center, or has he been moved?
As far as I know, he's still at Wilson, and the detectives are kind of waiting for word to try and get in there and see if he'll submit to some interview today to find out what was the underlying cause and if there's any other issues that we need to know about.
Is there any expectation that the charges might be filed?
No, I've contemplated it because there are some minor things that could be charged. As far as causing public fear and inconvenience, and then there's definitely a major inconvenience and major loss of revenue for Wal-Mart. But in cases like this where it's just a result of mental instability, it's usually not necessary or helpful to file petty criminal charges on top of that. So I think we will let the mental health professionals try and help this individual the best they can, and we'll leave the criminal charges out of it.
Johnson City Police Chief Brent Dodge, my thanks to you for joining us this morning and talking in detail about what happened yesterday, and certainly we're grateful that everybody is doing okay today, that there were no civilian injuries or injuries to the people who work for Wal-Mart, and certainly for the police officers who did their job and had to face such uncertainty. And we're also glad to hear that the man involved appears to be getting the help that he needs, and hopefully will make a full recovery.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you taking the time to have me on.